This is a subject that goes very deep, very vast, out into the cosmology itself, and you say it's more of an intuitive investigation than an academic or intellectual investigation. Set that up for us. What did you mean by that?
Well, what I was attempting to do was create a visual introduction into a topic that looks at Saturn worship as basically behind the origin of a malevolent culture that exists in the world today. It was designed to be very, very low level to give people a basic broad stroke, a brush stroke picture of how Saturn theory works, and linking that into a lot of the, the standard sort of conspiracy, as some people call it, ideas out there. I particularly wanted to link Saturn theory, this new cosmology, to the basically the central banking model of international finance, as in terms of what we find in Saturn theory, the archetypes, the symbols that have come down through mythology, linked back to that cosmology, are heavily influencing a lot of what we see in the corporate models, the central banking models, the debt-based finance system.
Start explaining to us what Saturn once was to the Earth in relationship to it, and then take your time explaining under its influence, under even the light factors, what life on Earth was like, what could develop under that, what our plant life was like, all of it.
Right.
You have the stage.
Well, in Saturn Death Cult website, the ebook put out, as I said, it was very visual, because what you're doing is you're wrenching people out of what seems to be almost an accepted idea of how our solar system formed. All right, and that's the uniformitarian idea that things have really changed slowly but surely over a 4 billion year period. What Saturn theory does is it turns that mainstream view on its head, and it basically says that the current solar system is essentially a system that is born of captured planets around the sun. Saturn being the most recent captured celestial body into orbit around the sun. So you have a fruit salad sort of idea of the solar system where objects are arriving, formed, they catastrophically rearrange into what we see today. And this is so at odds with uniformitarian science, with the disk accretion model, that for many people it's beyond comprehension. How can that be so wrong in mainstream science? And we're presenting this what seems to be absurd idea of planets that supposedly formed here over billions of years being captured fairly recently. The scary thing about the topic is that when we say recently, we say within human memory. In other words, this catastrophic rearrangement of the planets, this capture particularly of Saturn, took place within recorded human history. And that is what mythology represents. And in Saturn theory, we claim that mythology can be interpreted basically as a record of actual celestial events witnessed, rather than the madhouse of imaginative thinking that modern scholarship has created.
Well, and also that would make sense, as you're seeing repeated themes around the planet through various Aboriginal peoples and beyond.
Yeah.
So it's consistent
comparative
imagery.
mythology,
yes,
all right, is the key to this.
Yes.
You have a problem here with the mainstream idea. They refuse to believe the idea that there was a worldwide civilization in the past that possibly spread similar types of symbols, ideas, archetypes through mythology.
In various very ancient iterations of ourselves where we had high intelligence, ability to travel, and so forth. Yeah. Let's talk about it even from a mythological point of view, and from other esoteric points of view. There was a time when this planet was not bathed in the amount of light it's in now.
Correct. As far as we understand, and certainly from the mythological record, there's a universal understanding of a primordial darkness, a time, indeterminate time into the past. It shattered when Saturn, in whatever culture identifies Saturn, bursts into light. But prior to that time, to use something that a lot of people are very familiar with, the biblical reference, the Spirit of the Lord hovered on the celestial, ocean, so to speak, and so on, in darkness, before the let there be light moment. That's what it's described. A lot of cultures talk of this. And what you have is, if you've got a terrestrial planet that is a satellite of a sub-brown dwarf, in the electric universe model, what happens is that the electrical properties of the sub-brown dwarf create this bubble that encases the core of the sub-brown dwarf. But between the bubble and the core, the skin of the bubble, if you could imagine it that, all right, there's a space, an area there where terrestrial planets can actually exist. If we take Jupiter as a former possible sub-brown dwarf star, or something that is a size. Most sub-brown dwarf stars are about the size of Jupiter. It's down to their mass rather than their volume that differentiates them. But if you look at the 4 terrestrial moons of Jupiter, they all exist inside this radiation, basically a globe that exists around Jupiter. That is what we call a plasmasphere in the electric universe model. All right, we know it exists with Jupiter. We know it has a profound influence on Jupiter's moons and so on. And what we're saying is that with sub-brown dwarfs, the same thing will happen. And when you view them from outside, you see the bubble, because that plasma sheath, as it's called in the electric universe model, all right, is formed as a protective layer, electrical layer, against the greater galactic electrical field. What that does is it creates an opaque layer. So you can't see in, you just see what seems like a solid cloudy body. But anything trapped between that bubble and the core, or whatever, cannot see out. No light gets into it. No light passes through at that particular time. There is, however, a dull glow. There is enough light frequencies given off by such an object that if you existed in there, not only would you sense a dull glow, but it would be a uniform dispersion.
24/7.
Yeah.
Except there is no 24/7 yet.
That's right. And of course, what this does, if you can imagine somebody, an astronaut landed on such a satellite, or as we're postulating, ancient humans existing in this environment when Earth was trapped in that, you have nothing to give you time. There is nothing to allow you to calculate time in any way whatsoever. Certainly not beyond anything that is local.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Well, and I mean, when I was reading through this part, my first question was, yes, but you don't have photosynthesis, you don't have enough light for that, so how do you even have plant life on the planet to sustain these animals and these early humans? So please.
Well, the photosynthesis thing has been a contention for a lot of people who are critics of this particular theory. What we're saying is that the sub-brown dwarf, we now know sub-brown dwarfs give off certain light frequencies that do include infrared, do include ultraviolet, all right? But basically their light frequency is the reddish to blue sort of